So, communists recently have been claiming that libertarianism is just a form of fascism. Now, of course, for us libertarians, we know that nothing could be more wrong because fascism is a collectivist ideology and libertarianism is an individualist ideology. The two are polar opposites, whereas communism, in fact, is a collectivist ideology and shares that ground with fascism, with liberalism, with conservatism. So it is really only libertarianism in the political sphere and potentially even in the philosophical sphere that opposes that collectivist ideology. But of course, somehow we're the fascists. Just, it's because every enemy of communism has to be called a fascist by the communists, because fascism is what they claim to be their biggest enemy, exactly because it's their closest rival. If they weren't hammering on it all the time, people wouldn't be able to know there was any distinction between the two. So I was arguing with a bunch of NDPers who decided to jump on this criticism and try to claim that they knew something about libertarianism when they honestly did not. So some of them were claiming that there's a distinction to be made between right-wing libertarianism and left-wing libertarianism. And they were claiming left-wing libertarians believe that capitalism is a worse enemy than the state, which, I would refer to myself as a left libertarian in certain circles just in order for propaganda purposes, which is, I think, why there is a distinction made by anyone at all in the libertarian movement. It's not that we disagree with the fundamental basis of libertarianism, which is the non-aggression principle, the respect of private property, and self-ownership, but that we just focus on certain aspects that we think that in traditionally people's minds are more associated with the left, such as things like workers' cooperatives or mutual aid societies and things like this. And we tend to be more critical of corporate power, not legitimate corporate power, but the type arrived at through government assistance, subsidization, etc. So yeah, these people were trying to make a bunch of false claims about libertarianism, saying that it's essentially serfdom, that it will lead us back to feudalism. And I made various arguments with them, stretching on for, hours. I really wasted way too much time on this shit. And I should have known better, because you can't really argue with these type of ideologues, right? Because they just don't try to understand. Now, I've been on the other side of this argument before. I was a communist for 10 years. So when they argue with me, I know their arguments, and I know that they're wrong because I know them, right? And so I often try to argue with them from the left, using their own ideology against them, using Marxist analysis to beat them over the head. Because often what you find is that when you get these lefties arguing with you about libertarianism and you start focusing on things like, the individual's right to choice, and that individuals can organize their own enterprises and cooperatives and stuff, that they don't need the government to do this, and in fact they can do it better than the government. What ends up happening is that these lefties transform into the most reactionary conservatives that you would ever have seen. And they don't argue with you from the left. They cease all talk of anything about caring about people and loving people and that people are fundamentally good and stuff, which is the common left discourse. Instead, they insist people are stupid, people are bad, this will end up in a Hobbesian state of nature. This is, people will just be killing each other. You're going to take us back to some, you want to create Somalia, etc. Like all these bizarre arguments that conservatives often make when arguing against socialism. They will then appropriate all of those exact same arguments and use them against libertarianism. It is very interesting that they do this. What it means is that libertarianism is so versatile and such a complete political and philosophical theory that we can outmaneuver every political ideology from both sides. Because when you argue with leftists, you can out-left them every time. Because on the principles that they claim to stand on, which is the respect for the person and that, creating a more equal, caring society that's free of violence and force. These are things that they claim to want to create. Even Marxists, who, are quite violent people, claim at least that their end goal is a stateless society, free of violence and coercion and stuff, where people are free to do what they want. And every leftist claims that they want people to have real control over their lives and that the society that we live in now is a sham, because even if we can vote occasionally, we can't decide on any kind of real economic decisions in our lives, etc. Even though that's not really true. But this is the kind of mythos that they create, right? This kind of self-defeating mythos. So when you argue with them and say, yeah, people should have that kind of freedom and control over their lives. So, we should be out there organizing those things. And it's actually the government getting in the way of that. And the government supporting these big crony capitalists that you guys hate. And we want to take them out too. So, but in order to take them out, we actually need to take out the government, because the government is the one in bed with them. And as long as there's a state that they can latch their tentacles onto, they're always going to worm their way in. And, we saw that with the Soviet Union, right? Like, why do you think it reverted back to its current state after, 80 years or whatever? Because it didn't fundamentally change. You had your little violent, bloody massacres, but an elite still had power, absolute power. And the dissolution of the Soviet Union was just a transfer of that power from a political institutional power to a private power, supported by a political institution. So, it was just a sort of a fictitious entity almost. And it's all under the banner of this collectivist notion. So if you argue that with them, all they'll do is they'll start spewing conservative nonsense, because they can't battle it on their own ground. Because to admit that would be to admit that the government is the problem, but they love the government. In fact, it doesn't even matter if it's the capitalist government. They'll defend full tilt the capitalist government rather than no government every time, without fail. And then they'll even try to say that the government really isn't as nefarious as maybe they claim that it is a lot, and that, they do a lot of good stuff too, and that. And these are the same people that will be out protesting in front of Parliament Hill, holding signs like "Bring down the government." So they're not honest about their intentions. They don't even know what they want, apparently. Well, they want a state. Yeah, they want an ultimate state power, but just one that will enforce their ideas instead of the other guy's ideas. So, I mean, they're really just not what they try to make themselves out to be. And most of what they tell others and themselves is a lie. And so arguing with libertarians really exposes this. And it's why that they hate us so much. Like, they're, other than fascists, we're like the next on the list, right? And that's why recently they have been devoting so much effort to maligning libertarianism, spreading a lot of lies about the movement, trying to insist that we're all racists, and now that we are in fact fascists, apparently. It's because of this fear that they have of us. Because as much as they claim to hate, the conservatives and all the other guys, fundamentally they agree on the very basic things, which is that the state should have power over the individual. And us libertarians are the only ones saying no.